Welcome to It's Not About the Money, a podcast in search of grounded fundraising. I'm Heather, and together with my co-host Andy, we look beyond the quick tips and formulas. Join us as we explore the nuance and complexity of ministry fundraising. If you want to thrive in partner development, not just survive it, this is the place for you. Welcome back, everybody. Today, we are going to recap the 2 episodes we did with Andrea Lowe on the Enneagram. So if you've only heard one of those, we encourage you to stop right here and go check out both episodes before you return for this recap episode. And with that disclaimer aside, Andy, tell us a bit about our guest today.
Yeah, thanks, Heather. We are so privileged. I know I say this often, but we are really privileged to have with us a couple that we've known for a while. And we're just going to call them Jake and Lucy, air quotes, not their real names, based on where they work and the kind of work that they do. So, Jake, I'll direct it to you first. Tell us a little bit about what brought you to this point and some of the things that you do.
Yeah. So what brought us to this point? Well, that's a long story, so I'm not going to get into the weeds of that.
Keep it to 30 seconds.
Jesus brought us to this point.
Perfect.
We worked in fellowship ministry, and we like to say we were just minding our own business, and the Father intersected, and we call it our midlife reboot. We had both worked and served in a fellowship for about 20 years, actually a little more than 20 years, and just felt a very strong calling to go.
Yeah.
And so that was 10 years ago, that we felt that calling. So all around member care mostly, like you said, we both have master's degrees in counseling and feel equipped and ready to come alongside people and support them in their journey on the field.
Yeah. You guys are perfect to help us recap this episode. So thank you for coming in today.
Their joy.
Yeah.
Yes, Andy, you are right. I do believe you guys are so well equipped to speak to this episode because of the fact that you yourselves are 2 different numbers on the Enneagram, and you've had opportunity to work with a variety of people that show up to the world in a variety of ways. So I'm excited to kick off this conversation. So with that, what stood out?
Andrea did such a good job of highlighting so many things, but I think just kicking it off, I think she did do a nice job of talking about some of the challenges that we face in presenting the Enneagram in the body of Christ, that there's been some pushback in that. But she just did a really good job. And I think we would elaborate a little bit further in just understanding that the foundation of who we are is our connection to Him and to others. That's really the basis of who we are. And every tool should enhance those 2 things and push us toward those 2 things. And the Enneagram is useless if we do it in isolation, obsessively focusing on ourselves. Like, that's not going to be super helpful. But if we use it to understand His love for us and our dependence on Him, and then it's worth it, right? Then we can expand the reach of the tool into others and how we connect well with others. And He can be glorified through that. And so I think just understanding that connectional piece, that's what it's really about. And honestly, when you tie it into fundraising, the fundraising piece is just a microcosm of dependence and connection. Like, so we depend and we connect on the Father and each other. And fundraising, you have to do that. You have to depend on Him and you have to connect with Him in order to build that fundraising piece. And you need that with others as well. And then also when you get to where you're going, you need that more than ever, right? Like, you need to depend on Him and you need to stay connected to the vine so that you can serve fully, wholeheartedly in all that we do. And so I just think that this Enneagram is just a tool to help us get there, to understand ourselves, to understand Him, and to understand others in order to do that. And she, like I said, she did a nice job of expressing those things.
Yeah, that's an important distinction. It's not about like personality, navel gazing, or like identifying with a number. It's finding your identity rooted in Christ still.
Yep. And just elaborating on that and finding ways to grow.
I think having used a lot of these tools too, the unique thing that we've experienced specifically with the Enneagram is that it gives a wider breadth. So for example, MBTI is what we're most familiar with. It's the most respected, like from a psychological kind of professional
So that's
standpoint.
the Myers-Briggs.
Myers-Briggs,
right?
yeah. And the Enneagram gets pushed back in all kinds of circles. but it's been really accepted, honestly, in the business world and in the faith world. But I think the reason that is because it has a broader spectrum of both the negatives and the positives of personality. MBTI focuses more on the positives.
Right.
And because we are growth-minded people, like we're making disciples, like that's who we are. We're all about growth and transformation. And the Enneagram really speaks louder to that. Probably more specifically pointing out our sin and the ways that we our weaknesses and the ways we struggle. And there's beauty in that, like, right? Confession and repentance are the beginning of any significant growth in a believer. And so I think that's the thing about this tool that makes it more powerful in transformation, but also in like a specific realm like fundraising.
Yeah. I feel like that's really helpful because as Andrea was talking, she's using a lot of syntax. That's a lot of vocabulary that's new for a lot of people, talking about integration and disintegration, wings and triads and different centers. So I think that helps to wrap our minds around, like, at the core, that's the takeaway is how it helps us address some of those things in our life.
Yeah, it's almost like just a different kind of lens to highlight where you're strong, where you're weak. I mean, it was helpful for us, even just like listening to this podcast again and just asking the Father, asking each other, what are the ways that we've struggled in fundraising that could be a part of how He's made us, both in our weaknesses and in our strengths. And that was really fascinating. So, I mean, I would hope that would be what a listener would do, is go ahead and, go into the depths of what your Enneagram number is and ask the Father, like, how do you want to use my specific personality, the way you have made me, to enter into this whole world of fundraising? Yeah.
Can I put you on the spot? And can I ask you, like, as you were listening to this, like, what surfaced as you evaluated your own fundraising journey, like how your different personalities influenced and affected that? Because Jake, you are a 7.
Yeah.
Enthusiastic high five. Lucy, you were a 4.
Right.
So yeah, tell us a little bit about that.
I mean, it's always going to be a unique story because no 2 7s are alike, no 2 4s are alike. Like Andrea said, we have all 9 types.
Although we are wearing almost the same shoes today.
We are. This is true.
And Patrick.
Yeah, I think there are these threads that tend to be pretty consistent with the types. And then there's all these unique aspects because we have experienced different things in life, and we've had different hardships and different successes, and all of that comes into play. So, I mean, even just the fact that a 4 is married to a 7 is quite honestly like a miracle. Like Andrea pointed it out, right? She said the 7 is the one who's averse to pain, and the 4 is the one who like actually loves sitting in it.
Yeah.
Like, okay, so let's get married. And I mean, that's impacted our story. And I would say for me personally, like in a really, really sweet way, I would not have the lens that I have about pain, about suffering, about hardship without being married to Lucy. Do you want to say more about that?
Yeah, I think it goes on both sides. I think that he also makes me get out of myself and do fun things and go to crazy places that I don't know that I would have done without being married to a 7. And so it's just a great balance, honestly, even though most people are like, oh, that's a crazy balance. Like all the things you read, a 4 and a 7, like it's almost not possible. But really, we talk about a lot in life about living within balance of things and things balancing each other out. And I think it is because we are so different, and the Father has used that to keep us in balance. And our numbers just kind of reflect the truth of that in a lot of ways. Yeah.
So specifically to fundraising.
Yeah.
We did find some similarities that kind of are stopgaps for us, which was kind of interesting. One struggle for me would be that I just can't imagine why anybody would want to support me. Like that just doesn't make sense. And in the sense that I know people's stories, and a lot of people have a lot of things going on in their lives, and why would they take from their checkbook and give to me? Like that's hard for me. And my biggest fear of asking would be, is it going to harm the relationship? if I ask for funds.
Sure.
And so that part is true for me. And it connects to Jake's 7 in that his inner critic often says the same thing.
Yeah.
So there's kind of
disintegrating to that one.
There's a struggle there that you would be concerned about what they would think about you.
Yeah. So for us, I think we have to be aware of that and recognize it, see it, and go, yeah, I see you. No, we're not going to get stuck.
Reframe that
by that.
Sit in the truth. Yeah.
How long have you guys been aware of the way the Enneagram would describe your motivations? Like, how long have you guys known your number?
Yeah, knowing number is a tricky thing too with the Enneagram. One of the things I loved is that you said you haven't settled in on a number, because honestly, I don't know that any of us should like settle in on a number. I think it is a process, and that's honestly one of the beauties of the Enneagram is that it allows for that process to play around with it, because we are all 9 types. I think more about how I resonate with each of the 9 types more than I do specifically about the 7.
Okay.
And I think there's power in that, because we are all 9 types. And like Andrea said, it would be easy to look at any personality tool and say, oh, therefore, this type is the best fundraiser. But what she said was all of them have their own strengths. I love how she broke down the leadership strength for each type.
Yeah.
Because I think there's great value in looking at that.
Helpful.
And even looking at types outside of yours, maybe your wings or maybe your growth arrow, and saying, okay, how could you use that, God? How could you use that strength?
Yeah. When you guys started fundraising, I wonder, did you then have some of the language or like insight into the motivations of different things that came up that you do now? Would you say it feels different having some of the tools from the Enneagram and like understanding motivation?
Right. We were more focused on the MBTI, Myers-Briggs at that time. And so I think we kind of just got like more stuck in the language of that, introvert, extrovert, having it a finished or closed project or open project, those kinds of things. That was our language when we first went through fundraising for the first time. So Enneagram for us, I think we settled on our numbers 5 or 6, 7 years ago. I don't know, since we've been on the field. And I say settled, but again, it was definitely a process. And I always say, and Heather, maybe this is for you, I always say when I tried on all the numbers and I tried on the 4, it was the one that made me feel the most exposed. And so I was like, oh, that one's it. And you kind of you go, oh, okay, that one's it. So it's kind of a hard pill to swallow sometimes. But I think once we tried those on, and then once we started just seeing how they fit for a few years, it has brought us to this point of recognizing and realizing how it has impacted not just fundraising, but the work that we do and just all layers of the work.
So I know enough about using the Enneagram as a tool to know that you don't just take the information and kind of like peg someone or make an assumption about someone, but holding that intention with like picking up on things, and in your role, you guys work in caring for people, and you care for them through a variety of circumstances, some of which I'm assuming is fundraising and the way they're operating in that space. So how do you guys hold the tension of maybe seeing themes and patterns, or even kind of seeing a motivation in the resulting behavior and coaching people through that?
I get what you're asking. Just like, how might their Enneagram impact their functionality on the field? And how do we get there? And I think the best way is asking questions.
Curiosity.
So like,
always.
Yeah, just get curious about, I know that you identify with being a 3 on the Enneagram. How might that be impacting your fundraising? Although we say 3s might be the superstar fundraisers because they're going to dutifully get it, but maybe not so much relationally. How might that be affecting your relationships? So using some knowledge of the Enneagram, but forming a question for them to investigate.
And it really depends on the person.
Yeah.
Like if you just sense right off the bat that that's a tool that they resonate with and they use the language naturally, then it's actually pretty natural to to navigate a conversation because it's not awkward. But yeah, if they're not
use a different tool.
versed in it, you just use a different tool or a different observation. You can even use the observations without using Enneagram language.
Right.
Or numbers.
Right. Yeah.
Sure,
Because really, it's just a lot of awareness, of what's happening inside, like where a behavior is coming from, what feels threatening, where Jesus needs to go in and do some.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think we talk often about, maybe we don't use motivations, but a lot of the things that come out as behaviors, we recognize that they come from the heart, right? That flows out of your heart, which is motivations. Well, the Enneagram speaks to motivation. So it is an easy tool to connect those two pieces because, our behaviors flow from somewhere. So being aware of the heart, being aware of those motivations can be transformative.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, Heather, I'm going to ask you a question.
Sure.
I feel like you represent a certain portion of our listeners, somebody who hasn't really latched on to a particular number. How do you approach the Enneagram as you look at all the different types and how do you apply it to yourself and how do you draw from certain things and how do you get help from it without really identifying strongly with one?
It's a great question, Andy. I think it has been really helpful for me, maybe not so much in latching onto things for myself as much as it's just been really helpful in trying to understand other people. So I'm still trying to figure out what might fit and be most exposing. But my husband's pretty certain that he's a 5. And actually with learning about what that means or kind of some of the different motivations and the way that it can look for a 5 to operate in the world, which as Jake said, can look very different depending on the person. But yeah, I think it's just really helpful in understanding that, as Andrea said, it's about motivation and not behavior. So you can see a behavior, but then it's really impactful to understand what the motivation behind it might be. I know a lot of people that have kind of found what seems to really resonate with them within the tool of the Enneagram. And as I've explored what that means and what they relate to and how it applies to them, it has really helped me to understand their motivation and better understand how to communicate with them and how to understand them.
Right. They're not just weird or wrong or broken. It's just, they're just different.
Yeah.
So how does that impact you as you motivate others in fundraising would be my question.
In working with coaching people, it can seem we can all feel like we're the only one kind of wrestling with what we're wrestling through or our circumstances are ours. And so it can feel a little isolating. And I think that's part of what the enemy tries to do is isolate. But I think that, in understanding the Enneagram as a tool, and I guess just applying that to the different people I would coach and speak to, we're all going to have something. As Andrea said, there's a superpower in each kind of way of showing up to the world. And then there's also areas that expose that this is a place where Jesus wants to be everything that we can't.
It's so important to address the fact that fundraising is not a one size fits all. And it's like we've said this many times, it's not the formula. And this just really highlights you can't force a round peg into a square hole. If somebody is a 3 and they're super motivated and they're super driven, maybe they're going to excel. Like we talked about this with Patty. They're going to be super strong and super driven, but they could let other things go and they could be weak in the area of surrender. And when they're challenged and things start falling apart, they could really struggle with that because they can't just exert more willpower to get people to change their minds. And so I think that has really helped me to navigate and appreciate okay, I have to take a little different tack with this person than this person. And it's fascinating because hardly anybody is the same, really. There's trends, but everybody has a little bit different issues. Yeah.
But what I hear you saying, and even what you said, is that you do create a sense of balance. So even for a 3 where their strength might be just going after it, you bring in that balance of how to get them to be more relational and how to not be so driven. And so looking at each of the types and drawing in some balance, kind of like a 4 and a 7 would do. So that's kind of interesting.
Yeah.
You say, I see you have these strengths, but it might be helpful if you add in this other piece.
Yeah, I try to call that out from the very beginning,
Mm.
almost from the first conversation. And I ask a question like, how are you feeling? A very general question. How are you feeling about fundraising on a scale of 1 to 10? 1 being, this is the worst thing ever. 10 being, let's get started tomorrow. If somebody is leaning on towards the 10, like if they're like up by 8 or 9 or 10, that tells me, while they're really ambitious, they're really driven, they could have a gap or a weakness in this area. So I want to prepare them and say, I love that. I love that you are excited to get started. However, here's the reality that we see in a lot of fundraising. Like it's humbling and it's going to bring you to a place of surrender, and that's good for you. So brace yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, it is humbling. And I actually think that Jesus longs to show himself sufficient. And it is so good for our hearts when we see his sufficiency and when we are humbled and dependent, connected, to kind of go back to some of Lucy's words from the very beginning. And so I think I would also say that, we can all be really discouraged when we look at the shadow side of the way we show up to the world, when we look at our frailty or our weakness or our mixed motivations or the places that we get stuck. But it is in those things that Jesus shows up in our submission to him and shows himself sufficient and shows himself as the provider despite us. It's just really helpful to keep in view that it's never going to be our optimized self that is going to successfully launch us into successful fundraising or successful ministry or whatever. It's going to be our connection and dependence on Jesus, which comes in that weakness.
That's huge because we idealize strength as not just as Americans or Canadians, but as humans. We idealize strength, but we need our weaknesses.
Without a doubt,
Right?
because I even think of, some people who work globally don't have to fundraise. Maybe they work for an embassy or maybe they work for, other organizations where they don't have to fundraise. There is a missing piece that is created when we have to surrender and go and say, I have nothing and I can only do this by the Father's help and by people coming alongside me. And such a humble place. And to be humble it's a good thing. It's hard because we
To be dependent.
do want strength. We do want that power.
Yep. I think it does create a rub, though. This is a whole nother angle that Lucy and I talked about in looking at the Enneagram from kind of the other side.
Okay.
Was like, okay, what if so like individual units, if we were really aware of their personalities as partners and utilize that understanding to partner with them in unique ways, or even use specific language, like because communication is a huge piece of all of this.
Yeah.
But the other thing that we started talking about was fellowships can have personalities too.
Oh, interesting.
And the tendency is exactly what you said, because we've talked about it in the sense of worship. Like there's lots been written about this, but the North American church generally has what's called a triumphalistic view of worship. And so that is huge. Like not only in the ask, like at the beginning of your journey for fundraising, but also in the ongoing partnership and relationship.
So you're saying that because there's such a value for the triumph, that in the way that you're approaching the fellowship or individual people is with like a message of triumph? Is that what you're saying?
And how you communicate.
Communication is the big thing, because they want to hear the good stories.
Yeah. It's hard
And if you are displaying any of this humility and this brokenness and this need,
lament.
Sometimes the North American church does not like that. And they're like, oh,
This
we
person
need
is
to pull them off
failing.
the field.
It feels like this person is failing.
Yeah,
almost.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And why would we support somebody that's failing on the field?
Right. Maybe this is God's showing that it's time to bring them home.
Right. So yeah, that's a huge piece that you have to be aware of. And I think we get to come alongside fellowships and help them understand that too, that that's not a right way of thinking as you partner with us or anybody else.
Yeah.
Whether even in local work,
It's interesting that you mentioned that. I was just in episode 1, Josh Lindstrom mentioned the book, Liberating Ministry from the Success Syndrome.
Yeah.
Yes.
A long title, and I'm maybe halfway through it. But one of the things that the author brings up is we have to reestablish, and this is a little off topic here, but I think it's important. Like, we have to reestablish what success looks like. And obviously, it's easy to say, well, we're not in corporate America anymore. It's not profit margin or error rate or efficiency, but it's also not the number of disciples that I'm making.
Right.
It's, am I being faithful?
Yep.
It's hard to measure.
Yeah.
Super hard to measure. Yeah.
In our early journey of this whole life, we had read a statistic that stated the average global worker spends 33%, a third of their time managing their support. We read that, and I looked at her and said, no way.
Yeah.
Not us. We are not going down that road. And so, like, communication wise, we actually used that statistic with people that we were talking with. We used it with fellowships, and we said, if that's who you're looking for, if you're looking for somebody that's just going to be just like feeding you with all the stories and keeping you up to date, like minute by minute, we're probably not the right people for you, because we're going on the field for different reasons. We're not, I mean, we do want you to be inspired, and we want you to hear some stories from what he is at work doing in us, but it's not the 33%.
Yeah.
And so we told them that. And we, even in terms of how often we were committing to communicate with them, we told them, you're not going to get a newsletter once a month from us.
Yeah.
It's just not what we feel called to. And I don't know, some people could say, well, that's kind of a cop out. And some people might say, good for you. But I think it's been good for us. Like, we have had very little movement as far as like people leaving our team, our partner team. But I think it was because we were really clear about the expectations from the get-go.
That's pretty key.
It sounds like you were able to kind of set expectations for the people that you were inviting into partnership because you had an awareness and an understanding of yourselves. You know, that kind of circles back to what we're talking about, and just how the Enneagram is a tool in understanding ourselves. And I'm not sure I can directly apply it to that, but I'm just, that's powerful. And it's you've been able to steward your partners well within that expectation because you were able to make an expectation. Does that make sense? Versus
to know yourself.
Yeah, to know yourself and to communicate that clearly. Yeah.
And I think that honestly, our support base supports us. They may not even know where we serve. I mean, we have gotten do you speak Japanese? We haven't served in Japan. So I think that they do support us. And I think the reason they support us is because the people we are, and I tie that to our Enneagram number, is we go into conversations, we go into our relationship with them the same way we serve globally and work with people globally, is we listen. We are attentive to what's going on in their lives. I think most of people don't know all of our don't know a third, not even a third, very few of our stories, because we go in authentically who we are, which is to listen and to ask questions. And we often come out of those meetings and we get texts back like, oh my gosh, that was such a great conversation, but I realized I didn't find out anything about your life.
Well, you guys are counselors by nature too. So it's like you're sitting in the sweet spot.
Right. So
we have to be careful not to use that as excuse to, like Andrew said, to make our needs known, to be very a little more explicit. Is that the right word? To be a little more honest about
direct
where we're at and what we need. And that's true for all of our lives, not just the fundraising realm.
And the four-part of me would say, it doesn't matter. Just go in authentically and be yourself into those conversations. Be yourself, let them be themselves, and then see where the Father leads people.
But I was really encouraged I was working with one of my clients, I guess, and she's just almost kind of off the cuff said this statement like, oh, well, my mom always tells me clarity is kindness. It is kind to be clear. So I think it doesn't have to be like forceful and direct, but it is good to be clear with your needs and not expect people to, just like in a marriage relationship, to read between the lines.
That's right. We use similar language, but we use the word assertive. Like assertiveness has gotten such a dirty word kind of connotation in our culture. And actually, like, assertiveness is an act of love. Like to be vulnerable and authentic is to be assertive and it starts with those closest relationships. It is tricky though, because you go back to the average personality of a fellowship.
Yeah.
It's tricky. It's like, okay, how vulnerable am I with those who are supporting me? Because there seems like there's some risk there.
So if you're listening to this and you have a really strong relationship with your church and they get you and they're willing to stay with you through the highs and the lows, the ups and the downs, and celebrate that, that is significant.
Yep.
It really is.
Definitely.
It's why I love the direction that a lot of organizations and even specifically fundraising and gathering a team is going to a lot more intensive formats where there's this relationship and there's this ongoing understanding of these are the questions you can ask me. And going back to setting up expectations, like if you could do that from the very beginning, so that there's not this awkward, okay, how vulnerable can I be? But you set this expectation that's going to be the norm in the beginning, because we are going to go on the field and we are going to have trials. We are going to struggle. And we want you to be with us in that. We want you to partner with us in that. I think there could be some really healthy beauty in the partnerships that you create.
I feel like that's so helpful, because I think when people get into missions, they really have this idea like my mission field is in this country. And that's true. You do have a ministry to those people, that people group, but you also are ministering to your teammates, to the random people that you see on the street that you're never going to have a gospel conversation with, but you also have a ministry impact with your network back home.
Yeah.
That's pretty significant.
Huge.
So I'm curious, guys, if there's anything else that stood out from this episode that we want to make sure we highlight, or these episodes. Anything else that stood out from these
there
episodes?
Was so much.
We
so
could
much.
just talk for hours.
We talk about every number and every, I mean, she already did that really thoroughly. I think that was really helpful. I just love that when she said, and Andy and Heather, you both affirmed, is like, fundraising is hard for everyone.
Yes.
And I was like, that is such an affirming, okay. Like, it's just normalizing. It's a hard work, and just across the board saying that. I appreciated that. I also appreciated her standing against like the stereotypical Enneagram meme like sayings, you know, so often don't identify with those as much as the depth of the Enneagram number. Jake, as a 7, is not always the life of the party. But he is also a very healthy 7 who can have deep and hard and meaningful conversations. That's the work that we do all the time. So really, with just tying it back strongly to the Enneagram is don't get stuck in the stereotypical aspects of it. Don't get stuck in the Instagrammable quotes of the Enneagram. So
yeah, and probably also, you know, as people explore this tool and maybe see themselves in one of the descriptors or numbers, as they might see the unique challenges that number has, it's probably also good to not just kind of give into the futility of that, like, well, this is just how I show up. This is just how I am. But to understand, to have awareness of like, oh, hey, that's what's going on with me here. And then to be very quick to invite Jesus and others into that, right? Because that's the beauty that we have in this global family with our like big brother who is there for us and wants to help us. And then those that he's put around us to come alongside us for this good work.
Yeah, I think that's a great word, is not using, oh, I'm of this number, so I don't do this.
Right.
That's never going to be helpful, especially with the Enneagram. I feel like it goes against the heartbeat of the Enneagram because the Enneagram is for growth. If I say I'm a 4 with a very strong 5 wing. If I say, oh, you know, my 5 is really tired, I'm depleted, I can't, no more people time, you know, like that's blaming a number for my being tired. And that doesn't feel very fair, right? Like it's fair to say, I'm tired, I'm going to go take a nap, I'm going to get rejuvenated. Or I could also say, I'm tired, but Christ is in me and he is sustaining me and I'm going to rise above and I'm going to have that fundraising meeting that I don't really want to go to, not because I am good, but because I'm weak, because I am dependent, because he's going to give me all that I need. And I think all of those things can be true.
I'll do it and then I'll take a nap.
And then I may still take a nap. But
yeah. Or sometimes God will just say, no, just take a nap. Like, and I think that's the importance of being like connected to the vine, like taking our kind of steps in line with like the Spirit, being led by the Spirit and just not operating out of a formula because that's what, our Enneagram says we do, or
sometimes the most spiritual thing you can do is take a nap. Right?
Amen.
Michael Card quoting, I think, Brennan Manning.
Yeah. Well, and, Andy and I are preparing a coaching conversation for a group of people that are going to be passing through doing some training in the coming weeks. And we're talking about the story of Elijah and just, talking about at the different points that God meets him and provides in different ways, and how after he's witnessed this incredible event with the prophets of Baal and God showing up and then rain being restored, and then he flees for his life and he's despairing and he's like, oh my goodness, I just want to die.
Jezebel threatens him.
He just rests. He naps and then he wakes up and an angel brings him food, and that's just like how the Lord cared for him in that. So, and then after he had kind of been refreshed, he then went to the next place that he was supposed to go.
Yeah. The cave.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
to hear more about that story, stay tuned to our conversation with Nelson Musipa.
Right. Because we also talk about it there too. Yeah.
Cool. Oh, interesting. Cliffhanger.
Yeah.
And I hear the both and in that too. Like sometimes it is just obediently taking steps of faith, knowing that he's going to show up. Like it's that upside down kingdom. Yeah. Sometimes we have to make decisions that don't even match how I'm feeling or even what I'm thinking. God meets us there.
Yeah. Yeah. It's just not as simple as fake it till you make it, or do it when you don't feel like it, or don't do anything you don't feel like doing. Like all of those things, it's just not that simple. There's a tension that you've got to hold. Sometimes you do it when you don't want to, and sometimes you don't. And
if we only did things when we wanted to do them, it would be like, okay, I do things Wednesday mornings and that's it. Yeah, or whatever.
Yeah. But I feel like we can kind of fall into a ditch on either side, right?
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think, again, going back to the Enneagram, it's knowing what your ditch is.
Yeah.
Right?
Yes.
Like figuring out what is going to be the thing that trips me up the most.
Yes.
What is going to be the thing that paralyzes me and I can't do anything more than Wednesday mornings? Like, what's that thing? And so that's the gift of the Enneagram is knowing that part of yourself.
Yeah.
Yes. And seeing it not as the Achilles heel or the thing that will like stop you, but the very thing Jesus is going to step in and be sufficient in. Yeah.
So if our listeners only hear one thing, I feel like that's a pretty good one to take away. To embrace the weakness.
Embrace the weakness. And I would say, too, remember, it's not all on me or about me. And to go back to that communal aspect that Andrew talked about, you guys talked about, like we all need each other. We need the strengths of all of our types. And if we can have that mindset when it comes to fundraising, to utilize the relationships of the people that he's surrounded with me, even to utilize those who are saying yes and partnering with you, that would open up a whole new creative way of being sustained and kind of moving forward.
And, being aware of and celebrating the differences in other people. And instead of comparing yourself or comparing kind of your fundraising situation to another person's, like just being mindful of the ways that you can grow and learn from their strengths, or that they can come alongside you and things like that. Yeah.
Well, Jake and Lucy, it's really been a treat. And I think Heather and I can tell like why you guys are good at your jobs. Like it's just easy to talk to. And we could keep going, I think. This is probably one of our longest recap episodes. But thank you again so much for coming in. So perfect that you guys are here locally. You can come into the studio. It's so much better if I can look across the room at somebody.
Yes. So, yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So we hope you guys enjoyed listening to this one too. We are really excited about some upcoming episodes. Stay tuned and we'll see you next time. It's Not About the Money is presented by Provisio Fundraising Solutions. Provisio equips support-based workers with flexible training, practical resources, and one-on-one coaching. Find out more at provisiofundraising.com.